I want to explore the behavior of certain American billionaires, particularly the Ellisons, who soon will own CBS, Paramount, and TikTok. But before we get there, why do you think Trump told Netanyahu to stop bombing in Gaza, and why is the bombing continuing?
With Hamas, J.D. Vance, the vice president, actually published Hamas accepting some version of Trump's 21-point plan. The Trump Truth Social account published a photograph of Israelis protesting in support of a ceasefire to return their captive family members still in Gaza. So it seemed sincere, leaving aside the neo-colonial nature of Trump's plan, which is actually a pacification plan and not a peace plan. It seemed clear Trump wanted it to end. He wanted to be the head of a Gaza peace authority. Tony Blair was to come in as the head of the Gaza International Transitional Authority. And Benjamin Netanyahu had other ideas. Continued the bombing and slaughtered, I think, about 60 people yesterday and wounded close to 160. The bombing continues. 2 days ago, Israel deliberately targeted with a U.S. warplane and a U.S. missile a center for the blind run by UNRWA in central Gaza City. Oh. Netanyahu's under sustained pressure from the fanatics in his coalition who comprise the heart of his coalition. Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir, lesser-known figures like Orit Strzok, who say the so-called hostages are actually an impediment to total victory. And total victory consists of the destruction of northern Gaza, the Judaization of northern Gaza through new settlements, and the expulsion of the population through ethnic cleansing into the Sinai Peninsula. That's their agenda. And if Netanyahu does otherwise, they can just blow up his entire coalition and send him back to court after he loses immunity. So Netanyahu's kept the bombing going. He's gone before the Israeli public in Hebrew and said, we actually have no plan to withdraw. And he stated explicitly yesterday that troops will remain, occupation soldiers will remain deep inside Gaza throughout the duration of this supposed peace plan.
Well, why would Gaza surrender the hostages? Why would Gaza throw down their arms in the face of no deal at all?
Yeah, if Hamas understands if they give up their weapons, Gaza will not, the Israeli talking point of them giving up their weapons and surrendering and then Gaza returning to peace is just that. And that everything the Israelis say is deceptive. Look at the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority has not only given up weapons, they've turned their weapons on fellow Palestinians on behalf of Israel. Go into any Palestinian refugee camp in any major Palestinian city, and by day, the Palestinian Authority arrests Palestinians, and by night, the Israeli military raids and they coordinate. And the West Bank is now not just cantonized, but it is on the verge of being annexed. It has been turned into a giant prison. Palestinians can't travel between from one city to another because of the amount of settler terror and military terror. And so Gaza will face that as well. It was Hamas that expelled or pushed the Israeli military and Israeli settlers out after the Second Intifada and allowed people in Gaza to travel up and down their tiny little open air prison freely for the first time. So they're not going to give up weapons for the same reason Hezbollah won't. Hezbollah's major accomplishment has been defending Lebanon against an Israeli occupation, forcing Israel to leave in 2000 and preventing Israel from marching to Beirut as it did in the early 1980s. So they're facing pressure to put down their weapons. None of these groups will put down their weapons, but they will agree to a very one-sided agreement just to end the violence. And, it's a fact that Hamas is facing pressure from the civilian population of Gaza, which is suffered so much. But how can they negotiate when Israel is demonstrating the real power dynamic between itself and Washington that, as Tucker Carlson said last week, Netanyahu's running around the region bragging that he has Trump under his thumb. And by bombing Gaza after Trump says to stop, he is reinforcing that dynamic and illustrating everything Tucker Carlson said to be clearly true. The only way to stop Israel is through force, and Trump is unable to apply it.
Did Netanyahu react, if you know, to Trump's twice stated command that the Israelis will never annex the West Bank? He won't let it happen.
And it doesn't serve Netanyahu's interest to formally annex the West Bank. That's something the settlers want. There's ideological and religious messianic reasons for them to do it. But for Netanyahu politically, doesn't serve him well to formally make the West Bank part of Israel, even though Israel doesn't respect international law. It would mean under the Geneva Conventions, they have an obligation to care for the population, to provide them with postal services, electricity. It would eliminate the Palestinian Authority, which would create a security vacuum, which would lead to massive militancy. It just doesn't serve him well. He likes to keep it's for the same reason that Israel under successive prime ministers, including Netanyahu, insisted that they did not occupy the Gaza Strip, that they actually withdrew in 2005, 2006, even though they actually controlled the perimeters, the skies, the sea. It's to avoid having any obligation to the population. So the population's then controlled by the Palestinian Authority. So they're just gradually annexing as much as they can in what's known as Area C, the Jordan Valley, the areas where there's the most farmland, arable land, water wells, and they will confine Palestinians to their little Palestinian Authority maintained reservations or ghettos. That's always been the plan. But now, I mean, the government's ideological tendency has lurched so far into the messianic far shores of the extreme Kahanist right that the pressure to formally annex the West Bank might actually explode Netanyahu's coalition at some point in the next year or two if he manages to hold.
From the perspective of Hamas, why would they even negotiate with the United States and Israel in light of the trap Trump lured them into in Iran and the murders that Netanyahu committed in Lebanon?
Real deal breaker should be the attack that Israel waged on Hamas's negotiating team in Qatar and Doha.
Right.
With some advance warning to Trump, but the Trump administration said we were only given 10 minutes, which further illustrates how firmly Netanyahu controls them and how disrespectful and contemptuous he is of Washington. Either way, that should have been a deal breaker. Israel wanted to destroy the entire negotiating team, but Hamas, they're shrewd and they understand that that to fulfill Israel's objective and to just abandon negotiations altogether plays into Israel's hands. It's for the same reason that Iran, when Israel sabotaged the Natanz nuclear facility in 2018, in order to break up negotiations that were underway between the US and Iran continued to negotiate, but they escalated their uranium enrichment. So Hamas will continue to fight in the Gaza Strip as it works to negotiate. But what's interesting is how the dynamics between Qatar and the United States have shifted. There's been a deal since that attack. First of all, Qatar has former lobbyists in cabinet level positions inside the White House. They gifted Donald Trump something like $500 billion.
The plane is worth $400 million. They agreed to $400 billion in investments in the United States.
Right. He bought an Air Force One jet from them that they didn't want anymore, a luxury airliner, and they made $400 billion in investments. Trump walked away with something like $1 trillion from the Gulf. So Qatar has some influence. Through Trump, Israel was forced to apologize for that strike. And quietly, as part of this deal, Al Jazeera has installed new leadership. a new director who has imposed a softer line. I believe he actually comes from, I could be incorrect, but I believe he actually comes from Al Hurra, which is the US government funded Arabic language network. And he has imposed a softer line so that Al Jazeera Mubashir, the Arabic network, is actually just focused on the humanitarian situation in Gaza and doing less coverage that's favorable to Hamas. So something deeper is in the works. Hamas has avoided being assassinated. They've also resisted the pressure from the US and Israel to be pushed out of Qatar entirely. But Qatar is moving, and there is movement towards a deal, but Israel is the main obstructionist because Trump won't be able to exercise any leverage. That a group of lobbyists who represent the state of Israel are planning a massive campaign targeting Christian churches around Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Denver. And these lobbyists, what they want to do is geofencing around the perimeters of these churches so that when you walk in there with your phone begins to be targeted with ads promoting Israel, reminding you of the horrors of October 7th. You will also be treated to virtual reality interactions where you can watch horrific scenes of October 7th on an Oculus. There will be billboard displays in and around church areas. And what they aim to do is actually digitally rope something like 4 to 5% of all US Christians, at least initially, into a Israeli propaganda Clockwork Orange style megaplex, and then track their phones after they leave. It's a $4.5 million deal right now, which will expand and which builds on another foreign agent deal that Israel has in which Israel has contracted Brad Pascal, the former campaign manager of Donald Trump, to the tune of $1.5 million a month to contract influencers and to game the algorithms and LLM models of ChatGPT and other AI platforms in favor of Israel. There's also a separate deal to purchase influencers and pay them what amounts to $7,000 per post in support of Israel. And we can kind of guess who they are from the kind of activity that we've been witnessing online. For example, one of the apparent influencers is named Lizzie Savetsky. We've never heard of any of these figures before. And she recently boarded a small luxury yacht in an Israeli port and claimed that it had been captured from the flotilla, was filled with needles and condoms and margarita machines. Unfortunately, her handlers neglected to remove the orange juice bottles, which had Hebrew labels showing they were Israeli brands, something that flotilla passengers could have never acquired. So it was all planted. Let me just improve the sound here.
Wow. What does any of this have to do with the Ellison's acquisitions, if anything, of Paramount, CBS, and of all things TikTok?
Last year, which has seen continued attacks on southern Lebanon, thousands of violations of the ceasefire there, a 12-day war with Iran, the slaughtering of the entire cabinet of Yemen, and assassination of the prime minister as Israel fails to suppress resistance from the Ansar Allah government, attacks genocide inside Gaza, a massive campaign of arrests and de facto annexation of the West Bank. I mean, the fronts just pile up. These are all just in the region. Now, Netanyahu has announced an eighth front to the war. In a meeting with U.S. paid influencers for Israel, he basically signaled his intention to wage war on the minds of the American public, and that America has become the eighth theater of Netanyahu's global war. And he openly called for TikTok to be purchased. So it's happened right. It's happening right before our eyes. It's happened today. This plan, this eighth front, just took control of an important legacy media property, CBS News, through the merger of Paramount and Skydance, the company of Larry Ellison, the Oracle billionaire's son, David Ellison. The investors behind Barry Weiss's Free Press are some of the major AI tech warlords. David Sachs, who is one of them, is in charge of AI and crypto policy for the Trump administration. So if these investors made money off of Paramount's purchase of the Free Press, then what we have here is a very clear conflict of interest, because David Ellison has installed Barry Weiss as editor-in-chief now of CBS News. So the editor-in-chief has a major investor, apparently, who has a Trump administration role in basically gearing AI and crypto policy for Trump, in apparent violation of the emoluments clause.
Well,
and she will produce coverage, presumably that's favorable to her investor. This is a clear and explicit violation of CBS's published code of ethics. But more importantly, just panning out, this is part and parcel of an Israeli takeover of American media as Israel faces global backlash and a complete cratering of its support in the United States for its genocide and seven front war in the region.
well, Ellison can TikTok. How's he going to take X away from his fellow trillionaire?
Well, Larry Ellison now owns TikTok, and TikTok has Oracle as a major CIA contractor. Larry Ellison is on the board of Friends of the IDF, and he is someone who's hosted Netanyahu on his private island in Hawaii. He's very close to him. So it looks engineered from Tel Aviv. Larry Ellison moved in on TikTok with venture capital, the venture capitalist Andreessen Horowitz. Mark Andreessen, who is a major investor of Barry Weiss, and Ben Horowitz, the son of David Horowitz, the anti-Palestinian agitator and former Trotskyist, who actually was a mentor to many of these neocons, including Charlie Kirk when he was younger. So it's very clear why this was done. And TikTok is now blocking or banning anyone from mentioning AIPAC in conjunction with an Israeli influence operation. It's been censoring anyone who is an Israel critic. The gray zone already has 2 strikes there. I think we're pretty much finished on TikTok. And the reason was spelled out by Mitt Romney and Tony Blinken in conversation when they complained about young people seeing too many dead Palestinian babies on TikTok. Ted Cruz complained in a Senate hearing that TikTok was spreading pro-Hamas propaganda. And then most recently, Van Jones, another apparent asset of the Israel lobby on Real Time with Bill Maher, complained that people were seeing too many Palestinian dead babies because of a Qatari and Iranian influence disinformation operation. And he managed to earn laughter too with a punchline about dead Palestinian babies. So these are the talking points, and the billionaire investors are responding to these talking points. And as we just published at the Gray Zone, sourcing reporting from the investigative journalist Jack Paulson, David Ellison, the son of Larry Ellison, has actually been in talks with Israeli officials for a decade, referring to 12 Zionist billionaires that Israel sought to fund operations against pro-Palestine activism in the U.S. And that was his beginning, his genesis, as kind of a sugar daddy / cutout for Israeli intelligence as it sought to wage cognitive warfare on the American public. And that's what Netanyahu is referring to in that meeting with influencers as well. They've been very clear about their agenda. It's playing out before our eyes. And if you read any of the coverage For example, Barry Weiss being installed today as the editor of CBS News. None of it mentions this. And this is the subtext to the entire plot, is that Israel is waging the largest foreign meddling operation in history inside the United States. It's not Russiagate, it's Israelgate. And no one in mainstream media is treating it as a scandal, possibly because they're afraid that they'll be bought next. Lobbying network is her. She and Stevens said they accepted the label of Zionist fanatic, that they won't dispute it. The documents that we published are absolutely damning. And of course, they're 10 years old, but they help illustrate what's taking place right now. This is a foreign takeover using a fifth column of Zionist billionaire cutouts who are advancing the interests of an apartheid state that's engaged in a genocide that is hated everywhere around the world. And it's not going to work, but what they're doing in suppressing whatever's left of the news division at CBS, whatever's left of 60 Minutes, which was already a tool of the intelligence agencies and performed propaganda services for Israel, is they're trying to legitimize Israeli propaganda through a legacy media property. They're not actually going to breathe new life into CBS News. They're just using its carcass to legitimize. So this really is a war on us. We are the eighth front of this war. Christians going to church without even knowing it in Arizona, in California, in Colorado will now be blasted with Israeli propaganda through their phones and tracked everywhere they go. Our media is now going to be overrun with paid influencers, but none of us will know that they are advancing the agenda of a foreign government. And some of the major media properties and 60 Minutes, this once treasured weekly news magazine that was home to the investigations of Mike Wallace, will essentially be under the control of American AI warlords and Tel Aviv. This should be a much bigger scandal, and it's a scandal, again, of foreign meddling.
Well, you know, this Justice Department is not going to investigate it, and probably none will if the Zionists continue their...
I mean, this is a pathway to a dictatorship, a techno-feudal dictatorship, setting the stage by labeling large swaths of the American public as terrorists, sending troops into American cities to suppress dissent. Trump referring to major American urban centers as training grounds for foreign conflicts, the labeling of anyone now off the coast of Venezuela as terrorists. The whole definition of terrorism, which came into being through the AUMF after 9/11, has been expanded to the point where none of us are safe from that designation. The purpose is to suppress dissent so that we can't do anything about this takeover. So it's important now to understand at least what the stakes are, and that this isn't a partisan issue. But with Donald Trump in the White House, these forces, these AI techno-feudalists, and who are all ideologically, militantly Zionist, and their Israeli partners in crime, have more control over American policy than ever before. So it's important to resist it.
Here's the person that whispers into Trump's ear every morning and every night, sounding like it's Berlin in the 1930s.
And for testing various tech surveillance mechanisms. It's a part of an entire project that I would call global Gazification.
Succeeded in removing every undocumented person from the United States. They just find another class of people to go after, because monsters, dictators, need a target. They need an enemy. They need to be able to focus the ire of their people on some harmless enemy that can't resist.
No, that's a great point. I mean, in the BB, Trump expanded the size of ICE to an almost intractable level. It got like over $50 billion. So while China is building these expansive bridges over massive canyons and building high-speed rail, the United States government is deputizing the Proud Boys and deputizing a possible criminal element to expand ICE as much as possible. We have no way of vetting the personnel of ICE or knowing who they are because they're masked. Their defense is, oh, we're going to get doxxed. And they have full latitude to kidnap Americans based on how they look. When this campaign is over, they're still going to be there with this massive budget. If you watch any NFL game during a commercial, you'll see ICE agents are being recruited and offered a $50,000 signing bonus. And this Praetorian Guard will be so entrenched that it cannot be removed. And it's an ideological force. 100% of those signing up want to abuse Americans who they consider to be terrorists or illegal immigrants.
They hail can enter Oregon. So I don't know where this is going to go or what's going to stop it.
It's a complete violation of the whole concept of federalism.
Correct.
Founding fathers enshrined.
Correct. She made a terrific 31-page treatise in defense of federalism. But what these masked monsters are doing in Chicago is simply reprehensible. They're using axes to kick in doors, and they are beating people up if they don't have a passport with them and cannot prove that they're an American. This, of course, totally violates the Constitution. You don't have to prove anything. The government has to have an arrest warrant to restrain you unless it observes you committing a felony. Max, thank you for... Go ahead, please.
Who is a great human rights lawyer and journalist and friend of ours, who is on the Conscience ship, which is due to either reach Gaza and break the siege or to be intercepted any minute, possibly right now. Passengers from the Samud Freedom Flotilla, including Greta Thunberg, have been let out after being abused for a week. And Mike Huckabee, the supposed U.S. ambassador to Israel, has mocked Greta Thunberg on his Twitter account. And there are American citizens who are due to be kidnapped by Israel or who have been. And what Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador, is saying is, we will not provide consular representation to U.S. citizens because I actually represent Israel. So that's another indication of where we are with this government and who's actually in control. American citizens attempting to bring aid to Gaza, being kidnapped on the high seas by Israel, will not receive consular representation as they're abused by Israeli foreign police and security personnel. That is disgusting.